Mr. Lieu believes that black people are stupid and will not pursue the full clip in its entirety. He purposely presented an extracted clip.
The witness will suspend for a moment. It is not proper to refer disparagingly or to a member of the committee. The witness will not do that again.
Sure, even though I was called despicable.
The witness may not refer to a member of the committee as stupid.
I didn't refer to him as stupid. That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. You didn't listen to what I said. He is assuming that black people will not go pursue the full 2-hour clip. And he purposefully he cut off, and you didn't hear the question that was asked of me. He's trying to present as if I was launching a defense of Hitler in Germany. That was unbelievably dishonest, and he did not allow me to respond to it, which is worrisome, and to tell you a lie, I was there. I'm deeply offended by the insinuation of revealing that clip without the question that was asked of me. I received word on my way in that many of the journalists were confused as to why I was invited, and none of them knew that I myself was the victim of a hate crime when I was in high school. That's something that very few people know about me because the media and the journalists and the left are not interested in telling the truth about me because I don't fit the stereotype of what they like to see in black people. I'm not a Democrat. I support the President of the United States, and I advocate for things that are actually affecting the black community. I'm honored to be here today in front of you all because the person sitting behind me is my 75-year-old grandfather. I've always considered myself to be my grandfather's child, and I mean to say that my sense of humor, my passion, and my work ethic all comes from the man that is sitting behind me. My grandfather grew up on a sharecropping farm in the segregated South. He grew up in an America where words like racism and white nationalism held real meaning under the Democrat Party's Jim Crow laws. Grandfather's first job was given to him at the age of 5 years old, and his job was to lay tobacco out to dry in an attic in the South. My grandfather has picked cotton, and he has also had experiences with a Democrat terrorist organization of that time, the Ku Klux Klan. They would regularly visit his home and they would shoot bullets into it. They had an issue with his father, my great-grandfather. During my formative years, I had the privilege of growing up in my grandfather's home. It's going to shock the committee, but not once, not in a single breath of a conversation did my grandfather tell me that I could not do something because of my skin color. Not once did my grandfather hold a gripe against the white man. I was simply never taught to view myself as a victim because of my heritage. I learned about faith in God, family, and hard work. Those were the only lessons of my childhood. There isn't a single adult today that in good conscience would make the argument that America is a more racist or a more white nationalist society than it was when my grandfather was growing up. And yet we're hearing these terms sent around today because what they want to say is that brown people need to be scared, which seems to be the narrative that we hear every 4 years right ahead of a presidential election. Here are some things we never hear. 75% of the black boys in California don't meet state reading standards. In inner cities like Baltimore, within 5 high schools and 1 middle school, not a single student was found to be proficient in math or reading in 2016. The single motherhood rate in the black community, which was at 23% in the 1960s when my grandfather was coming up, is at a staggering 74% today. I am guessing there will be no committee hearings about that. There are more black babies aborted than born alive in cities like New York, and you have Democrat Governor Andrew Cuomo lighting up buildings to celebrate late-term abortions. I could go on and on. My point is that white nationalism did not do any of those things that I just brought up. Democrat policies did. Let me be clear. The hearing today is not about white nationalism or hate crimes. It's about fear-mongering, power, and control. It's a preview of a Democrat 2020 election strategy, same as the Democrat 2016 election strategy. They blame Facebook, they blame Google, they blame Twitter. Really, they blame the birth of social media, which has disrupted their monopoly on minds. They called this hearing because they believe that if it wasn't for social media, voices like mine would never exist. That my movement Blexit, which is inspiring black Americans to leave the Democrat Party, would have never come about. And they certainly believe that Donald Trump would not be in office today. Looking on the next thing to focus on now that the Russian collusion hoax has fallen apart. What they won't tell you about the statistics and the rise of white nationalism is that they've simply changed the data set points by widening the definition of hate crimes and upping the number of reporting agencies that are able to report on them. What I mean to say is that they're manipulating statistics. The goal here is to scare blacks, Hispanics, gays, and Muslims into helping them censor dissenting opinions, ultimately into helping them regain control of our country's narrative, which they feel that they lost. They feel that President Donald Trump should not have beat Hillary. If they actually were concerned about white nationalism, they would be holding hearings on Antifa, a far-left, violent, white gang who determined one day in Philadelphia in August that I, a black woman, was not fit to sit in a restaurant. They chased me out. They yelled race traitor to a group of Black and Hispanic police officers who formed a line to protect me from their ongoing assaults. They threw water at me, they threw eggs at me, and the leftist media remained silent on it. If they were serious about the rise of hate crimes, they may perhaps be examining themselves and the hate that they have drummed up in this country. Bottom line is that white supremacy, racism, white nationalism, words that once held real meaning, have now become nothing more than election strategies. Every 4 years, the Black community is offered handouts and fear. Handouts and fear. Reparations and white nationalism. This is the Democrat preview. Of course, society is not perfectible. We've heard testimony of that today. There are pockets of evil that exist, and those things are horrible and they should be condemned. But I believe the legacy and the ancestry of Black Americans is being insulted every single day. I will not pretend to be a victim in this country, and I know that that makes many people on the left uncomfortable. I want to talk about real issues in Black America. I want to talk about real issues in this country and real concerns. The biggest scandal, this is my last sentence, in American politics is that Democrats have been conning minorities into the belief that we are perpetual victims, all but ensuring our failure. Racial division and class warfare are central to the Democrat Party platform. They need Blacks to hate whites, the rich to hate the poor, and soon enough it'll be the tall hating the short.
The time of the witness has expired. Ms. Clark?
I do want to go back to Ms. Owens for a second. You made a statement at the very beginning on why you were here, and I think the victim of, if you've heard your story, and you've told that story many times, but if you would share how that's affected your view as you go forward and the issues that you're wanting to address today.
Certainly. So when I was speaking about different classifications of hate crimes, which actually has increased and obviously impacts statistics, when I was in high school, I received a slew of messages from the Democrat governor of Connecticut's son, Mr. Daniel Malloy, and at the time he was the mayor of Stamford, and his son, along with 3 other boys, referred to me as the N-word, threatened to tar and feather my family and put a bullet in the back of my head like they did to Martin Luther King. This is a story that's not often spoken about because the media has no interest in telling the truth about how it's formed my views towards conservatism. The media turned it into a firestorm, and it became a political tool for people to gain power. The NAACP used me at that time, would just meet me outside of the school with cameras in tow to speak out against the crimes. Of course, now I'm older and I realize that that's really just a fundraising mechanism, and that a lot of these groups survive because they cannot have the problem fixed ever. The NAACP never wants racism to go away. Bottom line, all I was looking for at that time was an apology. The youngest person in that car was 14 years old, and I understand that human beings can make mistakes and do stupid things, but we're not in a society anymore where an apology is good enough, and we're obsessed with labels. We're obsessed with labeling people as racist, as they did to those young boys, and it simultaneously impacted me as a victim. It's not fun to be a victim. And I'm adamantly against victimhood, and I speak out to the Black community about how it ultimately harms us.
And I appreciate Anthony for sharing that. And I think as we go forward, as I started my testimony with, is all of us here need to be heard. This is exactly what we're advocating. The more we hear, the more we can then at least relate to those who we may disagree or agree with. And I thank you for being a part, and the rest. For that, I yield back.
Ms. Owens, let me begin with you if I can. I think it's fair to say that you didn't start off on the conservative side of the ledger. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was a liberal.
Okay. And so just on a couple of issues, and you mentioned them in your statement, but just to go back to them, if you could tell us again kind of what they are and what hatred that you've experienced as a result of having this point of view. You mentioned the term Blexit. Would you describe what that is and what hate that you've experienced as a result of your position on that?
I launched a movement called Blexit, which is the Black exit from the Democrat Party. When I became educated about the issues and stopped reacting emotionally, which is what the left wants us to do, presumably, when they hold up pictures of burning churches, I began to examine the facts and look at some of the narratives they were spinning. For example, in 2016, it was police brutality, and I realized that they are dissuading us against our own best interests. And I wanted to have a more productive dialogue with the Black community about the issues that are actually affecting us and impacting us. When I announced that I was a conservative, I've never seen anything more racist, more disgusting, more vitriolic, and more hate that's come my way in my entire life, and the things that Democrats and the media say about me today. I've been referred to as an Uncle Tom, a bed wench. For those of you that don't know, that means a slave that sleeps with the master, a house nigger. And these are all words that have been said over and over again about Black conservatives when they have the audacity to think for themselves and become educated about our history and the myth of things like the Southern switch and the Southern strategy, which never happened.
You're pro-life, is that accurate? And,
That's correct, and I started off pro-choice.
and what sort of hatred, if any, have you experienced, or do you?
That hate tends to come majority from Caucasian Democrats. When I start telling the truth about the fact that the community that is the most impacted by abortion is the black community. 800 to 900 black babies are aborted every single day. That amounts to about 18 million black babies aborted since 1973. And the black population has stagnated. Our population growth has stagnated completely. These are the kinds of logical discussions that I've had that have earned me all the titles that we discussed before.
I don't know that you've seen this, but it's a memorandum that the majority Democrats prepare for the committee members. And in this memorandum, they go through the various witness names and organizations that they represent, the Anti-Defamation League, Equal Justice Society, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and then we get to you. Oh my goodness. Candace Owens, Director of Communications at the conservative. Nobody else is described as progressive or liberal, but you are described as a conservative advocacy group, Turning Point USA, and a conservative commentator and political activist known for her criticism of Black Lives Matter and the Democrat Party. I think you've caused my friends on the left to go to their safe spaces, and I'd love to explore with you a little bit of the reason for that. Do you consider yourself a conservative?
I am a conservative, yes.
Okay. Are you pro-life?
I am pro-life.
Does that trigger people when you see them, that they know that you're pro-life?
It makes them very upset, and Democrats hate me.
Do you own a gun?
Pardon?
Do you own a gun?
No, sir.
When next time you come to Colorado, we'll take you shooting. Are you a Christian?
Yes, I am.
Are you proud of your family?
I'm very proud of my family.
Okay. Let me ask you something. Do you hate Americans with black skin color?
Absolutely not. I actually love Americans with black skin color so much that I'm willing to fall on the sword 1,000 times for them to wake up and realize that we are being lied to, abused, and used by the Democrat Party.
How about Americans with white skin color? Do you hate them?
I do not, and that's a problem for people on the left.
Do you hate Hispanics?
I do not.
Do you hate Asians?
I do not.
Do you hate lesbians or gays or anybody from the LGBTQ community?
Nope, I've got all of that in my family.
I'm baffled because in the chairman's opening statement, he said that you openly associate with purveyors of hate.
Yes, purveyors of hate, by his definition, is anybody that supports the president. I support the president because he's done a tremendous job in helping the black community, despite all of the rhetoric from the media and leftists, which do not want him to be successful.
Tell me a little bit about how the president has helped the black community, if you would, please.
Well, he's lowered the black unemployment rate. It's the lowest it's ever been in the history. He's getting us off of our feet. The last number I checked was 3.5 million people are off of food stamps, something that the Black Caucus sat down and didn't applaud. Neither did any of the Democrats applaud, because they want a system where blacks are dependent on the government, are the people that put in place the policies that broke down the black family. And the biggest problem that's facing our community is father absence. In every room that I've been in with the president, he talks about real issues, and he doesn't pander to us. He doesn't do Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Southern drawl accent and speaking to us like we're slaves. He asks us important questions, and the most important question he could have asked was, Black America, what do you have to lose? Because we were already losing under Democrat leadership.
Do you believe that you openly associate with purveyors of hate?
I absolutely do not. I have no tolerance for hate whatsoever.
Do you believe that college campuses should be open discussions, or there should be open discussions on college campuses for various issues?
I absolutely do. You know, I do a campus tour. Tonight I'm flying up to the University of Connecticut to continue that, and we are being met with aggressive leftist groups. 3 Antifa chapters have declared they're going to try to shut it down, and we face this violence every day on the left, and nobody ever wants to talk about it.
And I guess what I was going to ask you, you went on to explain it before I got a chance to, but have you ever been disinvited from speech opportunities at college campuses because of your conservative views?
All the time.
Is that a form of hatred, do you think?
Of course it is, and we're not talking enough about political hatred in this country. We're not talking enough about conservative activists being attacked, like myself. We had a student whose dorm was set on fire for being a member of the Turning Point chapter, and all we preach is for free markets and capitalism as a means to lift the most people out of poverty. That is my belief, and of course, my main thesis is that black people do not have to be Democrats, and we are not owned by the left, and I understand that causes some people trouble.
As a conservative, you've attended many conservative events and visited with many conservatives. And I am not denying for a moment that there are white supremacists and we should condemn white supremacists, that there are Nazis and we should condemn Nazis, that there are hateful groups all across the political spectrum and we should condemn those. But in your interactions with conservatives, have you seen hateful speech, bigotry, racism among the conservatives that you've associated with?
I speak in front of conservatives probably 3 times a week. I jump on a stage and I say everything pro-black, and they are so supportive and they applaud. All they want is for black Americans to realize that they are Americans first and foremost. Conservatives are patriots. The president is a patriot, and I'm a patriot, and there is no skin color in patriotism.
Thank God we have you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Buck, the gentleman from Colorado was talking about, but in the listing of witnesses in the chairman's memo, it did something I've not seen in my brief time in Congress, or indeed in my many years of legislative service in my home state. That is an editorial comment about a witness. Some might even consider that this not so subtle editorializing is in and of itself an indicia of animus. It's unfortunate, but it demonstrates how easy it is to let one's bias appear even in what is supposed to be an innocuous listing of witnesses for this hearing.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will yield, sir.
I assume you're referring to what is written about Candace Owens, where it says she's a director of communications at the conservative advocacy group Turning Point USA, and a conservative commentator and political activist known for her criticism of Black Lives Matters and of the Democratic Party. I don't think she quarreled with the accuracy of that. It's a simple statement of who she is.
Reclaiming my time. What I will say about this is you never, ever see anybody characterized in any other list of witnesses. This is the first time I've ever seen that, other than the stating what they represent or the group that they are from. This is seemingly anyway, going beyond the bounds of what is the norm. That is an indication to me of how easy it is to demonstrate animus. And so it means, for a logical question of Ms. Owens, which she's already addressed to some respect, is as you talk, Ms. Owens, and you go to universities, like you're going to go to UConn tonight, do you receive hate speech directed at you?
All the time, and I really do feel that the media on the left has made it okay. And I do just want to add that my biography, which I submitted, you reduced it to 1 sentence, calling me just a conservative activist, and it wasn't what I said or what I submitted to your office last night. And I just think that you opened with anti-black bias, and I see it coming from the chairman today.
And Ms. Owens, these efforts to shut you down when you speak publicly on issues that you care about under the protection of the First Amendment, are they peaceful?
No, they're really scary. They threaten us online perpetually. I receive threatening letters to my home when the media drums up narratives and pretends that I hate black people or that I hate gays or that I hate Muslims with no evidence supporting any of those claims. What they're inviting is for people to think it's okay to be violent towards me when they see me. They want to make it an act of virtue for people to be violent towards black conservatives that are outspoken.
There are, on occasion, false accusations and staged hate crimes. What impact do those have on actual, real hate crimes?
It makes it harder, I think, for people to come forward or for people to believe it. I don't see enough condemning of what Jussie Smollett did to this nation in terms of tearing us apart and causing a debate. And obviously the left was quick to believe him and put him on a platform despite absolutely no evidence. And it just makes it harder. Again, it just makes it harder for us to come together as a nation, which I think is what the president is trying to do, bring everybody together. And Ms. Owens, are you familiar with the case of Isabella Chow, who is a UC Berkeley senator who was harassed because of a position she took? I'm not. Well, Ms. Chow took a position of basically abstaining from a vote due to religious concerns and was harassed out of her position, and she was hate speech galore, all arising and going forward. So it isn't that there isn't hate speech. It's that we need to condemn all hate speech. That's correct. I definitely agree. We need to condemn all hate speech. There's only one type of hate speech like that they like to talk about and give a platform to. There is a double standard in this country, and that double standard, I think, is being felt the most by black conservatives, the Jewish community, and Christians.
I would like to take my time to yield to Ms. Owens. If there's anything that's been said, I'm the last Republican here, so if there's anything that you would like to respond to, I'd like to give you the balance of my time to do that.
Yes, I actually wanted to respond to Congressman Cicilline because he was making references to me, and I thought that was a bit cowardly. He said he was dishonest when he said that the president refused to condemn white nationalism. Mr. Potts just literally gave the exact quote, the president doing just that. He does not want to accept the reality that the president has on multiple occasions condemned white supremacy and white nationalism, and the best condemnation of that is in the president helping the black community every single day with his policies. He also brought up family separation. This seems to only be an issue for illegals at the border, and nobody ever wants to talk about black babies being separated from the womb of black mothers. So if he actually cared about that, he would be embracing me. And lastly, he brought up the rhetoric of the president as in the same breath that he referred to me as despicable. I'm tired of hearing the left refer to people as despicable, as deplorable. We are Americans and we are patriots, and even if we disagree with you, name-calling should not be something that is done, especially in these chambers.
In congressional hearings, the minority party gets to select its own witnesses. Of all the people that Republicans could have selected, they picked Candace Owens. I don't know Miss Owens. I'm not going to characterize her. I'm going to let her own words do the talking. So I'm going to play for you the first 30 seconds of a statement she made about Adolf Hitler.
I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German.
All right, so my first question is to Ms. Hirschenoff. Ms. Owens said, quote, if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. So when people try to legitimize Adolf Hitler, does that feed into white nationalist ideology?
It does, Mr. Lieu. I know that Ms. Owens distanced herself from those comments later, but we expressed great concern over the original comments.
From Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Ms. Owens, I'm sorry. We just started recording. Would you like time to respond to that?
Yes, I think it's pretty apparent that Mr. Lieu believes that black people are stupid and will not pursue the full clip in its entirety. He purposely presented an extracted clip.
The witness will suspend for a moment. It is not proper to refer disparagingly or to a member of the committee. The witness will not do that again. The witness may continue.
Sure, even though I was called despicable.
The witness may not refer to a member of the committee as stupid.
I didn't refer to him as stupid. That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. You didn't listen to what I said. May I continue?
Please.
As I said, he is assuming that black people will not go pursue the full 2-hour clip. And he purposefully he cut off, and you didn't hear the question that was asked of me. He's trying to present as if I was launching a defense of Hitler in Germany, when in fact, the question that was asked of me was pertaining to whether or not I believed that whether or not I believed in nationalism, and that nationalism was bad. And what I responded to was that I do not believe that we should be characterizing Hitler as a nationalist. He was a homicidal, psychopathic maniac that killed his own people. A nationalist would not kill their own people. That is exactly what I was referring to in the clip, and he purposely wanted to give you a cut-up similar to what they do to Donald Trump to create a different narrative. That was unbelievably dishonest, and he did not allow me to respond to it, which is worrisome and should tell you a lot about where people are today in terms of trying to drum up narratives. By the way, I would like to also add that I work for Prager University, which is run by an Orthodox Jew. Not a single Democrat showed up to the embassy opening in Jerusalem. I sat on a plane for 18 hours to make sure that I was there. I'm deeply offended by the insinuation of revealing that clip without the question that was asked of me.
First of all, I must say I have Tourette syndrome. Sometimes I have tics and make sounds I can't control, so please forgive me. For the past 25 years, I've served as president of the oldest pro-Israel organization, the Zionist Organization of America. We promote strong U.S.-Israel relations and work to protect American Jews and others from anti-Semitism and violence. As a child of Holocaust survivors, I've personally felt the horrors of unbridled anti-Semitism. I was born in a DP camp in Germany, grew up without the loving presence of most of my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, whom the Nazis murdered. A front-page article in the New York Times Friday headlines, "Bias is shared by extremes of the right, left, and Islam." We should keep that in mind. The Tree of Life synagogue murderer was a neo-Nazi who hated white President Trump for not being anti-Semitic, called Jews in the Trump administration a kike infestation. The New Zealand mosque murderer was actually a left-wing, self-described eco-fascist who also published a manifesto praising communist China as the, quote, nation with the closest political and social values to my own. Most of us correctly treat neo-Nazis and white supremacists as horrifying. History reminds us that we cannot write neo-Nazism off as a marginal phenomenon. There's a plethora of sickening neo-Nazi white supremacist internet sites fomenting hatred and violence primarily against Jews and blacks, but also against LGBTQ, women, feminists, and Muslims. We need to determine who is funding and is behind this. The FBI reports that Jews are the victims of 60% of the religious-motivated hate crimes in America. Jew hatred is the canary in the coal mine. It's unfortunately incumbent upon us to speak about the major issue threatening violence against Jews and all Americans, which is Muslim anti-Semitism, which is strengthened by significant institutional support and the support of imams and is becoming mainstream. Let's look at college campuses. During the decades that ZOA has been combating campus anti-Semitism, we've never received a single complaint about anti-Semitic discrimination, harassment, or intimidation perpetrated by neo-Nazis or white supremacists. By contrast, we receive hundreds of calls from students about anti-Semitic harassment, discrimination, and intimidation perpetrated by the left-wing, significantly Muslim hate group Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, and its allies. ZOA's letter to City University, we have documented that at these SJP rallies, it is common for SJP demonstrators calling for Israel's elimination, screaming Jews out of their campuses. Jews are racist sons of bitches, forgive me. When we take control of this campus, we're going to kick you out and make sure you don't graduate. Get out of America, long live the Intifada. Last week at Columbia University, the anti-Semitic hate group SJP distributed a flyer for its Apartheid Week with a caricature of a Jew that looks like it came from the Nazis' propaganda tabloid Der Stürmer. The Amcha Initiative database of almost 2,600 incidents confirms SJP and its allies are the perpetrators in most incidents on U.S. campuses. Unfortunately, that abhorrent incidents perpetrated by Muslim and leftist campus groups are rarely satisfactorily resolved. Let's look at the statistics. ADL's worldwide survey of 100 countries found that 49% of Muslims harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. This is a chart of that. You see the non-Muslims, it's far less. This is a painful fact that ADL has studied. It's more than double the anti-Semitism found among persons of other faiths. ADL data also shows in the U.S., 34% of Muslims, according to ADL, exhibit a high degree of anti-Semitism versus 14% of the general population. The 16 countries and the territories having the highest level of anti-Semitism were all in the Muslim Middle East. Levels of anti-Semitism there ranged from 74 to 93%. In a recent conference on anti-Semitism, a speaker said, 20 years ago, the major problem was anti-Semitism of the far right, but it flipped. Now it's the left and radical Muslims. We're in danger of seeing it spread to the Middle East and to Europe. The danger and problem is there is institutional support for violence by leading imams. Al-Azhar University, which is the West Point of Islamic academia, trains imams who fan out all over the world. A highly influential treatise by the former Grand Mufti Tantawi said, quote, gentle persuasion can do no good with Jews, so use force with them. Treat them in the way you see as effective in ridding them of their evil. At Al-Azhar Friday sermons, they've recited hadiths saying we have to commit genocide against the Jews in order to usher in the Messianic Day of Judgment. During the past year and a half, in mosques in North Carolina, New Jersey, California, Texas, Pennsylvania, imams have made the same speeches about genocide against the Jews. Can you imagine if rabbis called to murder Christians or priests were called to murder Muslims? We've demanded they should be fired. They weren't. Wayne Hurst Ali, a well-known Somali former Muslim, said, I confess that if you're Jewish, I want to apologize to you. When my half-sister showed me holy Quranic verses to support her hatred of Jews, I feared arguing with Allah, for Allah would burn me. I also hated Jews. I'm ashamed of my prejudice against you in the past. As Egyptian President Sisi said in a speech at Al-Azhar University, we need a religious revolution. You imams are responsible before Allah. The entire world is waiting. Let's speak frankly. We want to stop hate and stop institutions from supporting, condoning it. I don't know how much time I have.
You're 48 seconds over.
Well, but I was stopped. I was stopped. The outburst. The outburst.
Go ahead. Another 30 seconds.
I have something very, very important to say, especially as a child of Holocaust survivors. I was horrified to see Speaker Pelosi, Leader Hoyer defend Representative Omar after her vicious anti-Semitic remarks and presidential...
The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Owens.
That was unfair.
It was not unfair. You had plenty of extra time. Ms.
No,
Owens.
I did not.
Ms. Owens.
interrupted, I'd like to, what were you going to say? And I'm not blaming the chair because it was overtime. There were several witnesses that did that, and I get it. It's tough being chair sometimes. But what were you going to say? What was your point?
I was going to make two.
If you could turn the mic on there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Thank
all
you.
right.
I was going to make two important points that it was very painful to me that in light of the vicious anti-Semitic remarks made by Representative Omar and others, that no one in that party, many in that party defended her, saying she's not an anti-Semite, and there was no consequences. She was not thrown off of any committee, as Stephen King was for his outrageous remarks. And I was going to simply end by saying we need to investigate the Students for Justice in Palestine and BDS terror connections. We need to demand university leaders, very important, condemn SJP hate groups by name. They won't condemn them by name. They just say we're against anti-Semitism. We must demand colleges must suspend and expel students who commit these terrible actions against Jewish people. And that Title VI should be invoked, and they should lose federal funding if they don't do the right thing when it comes to anti-Semitic bigotry. And finally, we should be having consequences for members of Congress who make hateful and outrageous comments against blacks, Muslims, or Jews. And when it comes to Jews, we have not seen that. Well, that was Beto O'Rourke, who I believe you're referring to, who called Benjamin Netanyahu a racist. Nothing could be more absurd than that. He was involved in helping Ethiopian Jews, black Jews, come to Israel. He's actually had the most positive policies toward the Israeli Arabs of any prime minister we've ever had. So this is a ridiculous statement. Also, I might add, Benjamin Netanyahu has not built a single new community in Judea and Samaria since he's been prime minister. None. So it's not like he's even building all over the place, which is attributed to him regularly. So this comment was just really outrageous and despicable, and I think it should almost disqualify him for a higher office.
And by him, you're referring to who?
Beto O'Rourke.
Do you have any record of people of the Muslim faith going and doing terrorist acts, killing Jews?
Yes, and some years before. That is
When?
not.
When?
I believe that there was a group a few years ago, a gentleman a few years ago who went and killed people who were not Jewish, but he thought were Jewish in a house.
Was that in Kansas City?
Ago.
The Missouri deal? That was the JCC.
No, that was in a house. The recent JCC ones were actually very troubled Jewish Israeli bomb threats.
Let me say this. There are not many cases. You can't remember when it was or where it was. There are not many cases.
There are not many cases in the U.S. recently, but there are
right, that's
many,
enough.
many
That's enough.
cases.
We're running out of time.
What are your thoughts about President Trump's remarks regarding the Charlottesville demonstration, where he's quoted as saying, "You also had some very fine people on both sides"?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because the media has really completely distorted the truth of that episode. What he meant, and he said so when he said it, is that they're fine people who want to get rid of Robert E. Lee's statue, and they're fine people who are not haters, who believe for historical reasons they want to keep that statue. And he made that clear. And then in the same breath, Mr. Gomer, in the same breath, President Trump said, quote, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists when I say fine people, because they should be condemned totally." And yet the media has never made that clear, that he, in that statement, he condemned neo-Nazis and white nationalists. He did not mean that they were fine people. Quite the contrary. He's disgusted by those people.
If the person making the objectionable comment happens to be black or Jewish, then you're a racist or you're anti-Semite. And I've been amazed, Mr. Klein, the Anti-Defamation League has called you, as I understand, a Jewish person to be anti-Jewish. It's just interesting. Here you have someone that's calling, "We crush the United States under our feet," etc. That was reported, and within a minute, the report came back from Instagram that there's no problem here. Basically, these aren't the drones you're looking for, just move on. So I'm really curious, if you're going to enforce these standards, why are they so quickly enforced and erroneously enforced against people like my friends Diamond and Silk? I asked them recently when I saw them, are you still having trouble with Facebook? And they said, now, anytime we say something nice about Donald Trump, we spend forever just trying to prove that we're not a Russian robot, and that they send us through all kinds of things just to keep using the service. And here you have people that As a result of their misunderstanding of their own religion, they want to crush the United States. They think of us as the big Satan, Israel as the little Satan. I would just encourage you to take a look at that and why someone who wants to destroy the United States and kill everyone in this room gets a pass when others don't. So I would welcome any explanation you can find for that.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm not familiar with that exact example.
Well, I know it just happened.
Happy to get that back to my team to make sure that we look and review that.
Thank you.
Any calls of violence that target people based off of their nationality, their ethnicity,
Well, I know
their
it's the
religion,
way it's supposed to be.
We would remove it. I just unfortunately am not familiar with that case, but that does go against our principles.
Understand.
Mr. Klein, you remember the chairman agreeing to give you an extra 30 seconds because of the interruption that you experienced during your opening statement. And then do you remember being gavelled down by the chairman once you began speaking of the anti-Semitic remarks by a member of Congress? And we've just timed this. You only got 12 seconds. I have 30 seconds left. And so I'm going to give you those 30 seconds that you were promised and were denied.
I am deeply pained that after a congresswoman from Minnesota called Israel evil, hypnotized the world, Israel's an apartheid state, Jews use their money to promote what they want out of Congress, that this woman was defended by leaders of her party, defended by at least 3 members of her party who were running for president with no consequence. She should have been removed from all of her committees just the way Stephen King was for this unbelievable outburst of hatred toward Jewish people. In fact, there's actually a member of this very committee who publicly called Jews termites of this committee, and there was no consequence to that outrageous statement. So this is really frightening to me, especially as a child of Holocaust survivors. If there's not consequence to this type of hate speech against Jews, you're only going to get more of it. We're only going to embolden people to continue this, and ultimately, hate speech turns into physical violence. That's been true throughout Jewish history.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've been listening to the testimony and the questions, it strikes me that perhaps both sides are losing a perspective of why we have a First Amendment. It's because the freedom to speak our minds is absolutely essential to a free society. Jefferson said, error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is free to combat it. Speech can be ugly, disgusting, hateful, prejudiced, and alarming, but it can never be dangerous to a free society as long as men and women of goodwill have the freedom of speech to dispute it, challenge it, and reject it. Suppressing speech, even the most hate-filled speech, doesn't diminish its influence, it strengthens it. I think Churchill made this point very clearly when he said, it is the very conflict of spiritual and moral ideas which gives the free countries a great part of their strength. You see these dictators on their pedestals, surrounded by the bayonets of their soldiers and the truncheons of their police, yet in their hearts there is unspoken fear. They are afraid of words and thoughts. Words spoken abroad, thoughts stirring at home, all the more powerful because forbidden terrify them. A little mouse of thought enters the room, and even the mightiest potentates are thrown into panic. And then he goes on to say, a state of society where men may not speak their minds, where children denounce their parents to the police, where a businessman or small shopkeeper ruins his competitor by telling tales about his private opinions, such a state of society cannot long endure if brought into contact with the healthy outside world. Free societies don't punish words and thoughts, they punish deeds. And the reason for that is because words and thoughts can be countered by words and thoughts. That's why we have a First Amendment. And what we're seeing across the world today is that it is a very slippery slope between banning hate speech and banning speech we just hate. We've seen many examples even in our own country recently of legitimate speech being suppressed on college campuses, on social media platforms, and even in public discourse. You know, if there's an ideology that we don't like, the weakest thing that we can do is try to forbid it or suppress it. The strongest thing we can do is to use our own freedom of speech to confront it and defeat it on its merits. If we allow our society to become one where men and women may not speak their minds, as Churchill said, we'll have lost the very quality that he said gives free countries a great part of their strength. As Churchill said, these ideologies cannot long endure if brought into contact with the healthy outside world, but that in turn requires unrestricted freedom of speech, precisely the freedom that's protected by our First Amendment. Now, we've made very limited exceptions when speech becomes explicit incitement to do violence or to falsely defame an individual's reputation, but even in the case of defamation, the truth is always an absolute defense. What we're hearing now is something fundamentally different. It's to set up government or corporate officials to decide what speech is acceptable and what is not. And that is a very dangerous power that can quickly be abused. Today, a great deal of public discourse is conducted on social media. Major platforms like Google and Facebook that are here today, we've granted them legal immunity from the content of their platforms under the assumption that they're merely providing a public square and that those who use it should be held accountable for their own statements. This is appropriate as long as these platforms are not practicing any form of censorship or favoritism, other than, of course, censoring explicit incitement to violence. We're discovering, however, that they're indeed practicing censorship and political favoritism. This is their right as private corporations, but once they begin to practice censorship and political favoritism, they cease to be neutral platforms and instead become publishers who are responsible for their content and subject to action for incitement or defamation. So my question to the internet platforms represented here today is, I don't think you can be both. You can't be a neutral platform and at the same time exercising editorial control over content. The question very simply is, which are you? Are you a neutral forum or are you an editorial publication responsible for your content?
Thank you, Congressman. First and foremost, Facebook is a tech company. We are not a platform in that sense. We are not a content creator. We do not edit content, although we do moderate content under our community standards. After hearing your discussion, I think those are many of the issues that we wrestle with. To give people the ability to have a voice on a platform, but also to balance safety. We err on the side of allowing more speech. We want to give people the voice, but we do have to draw lines somewhere. And we feel that by drawing lines around things like calls to violence, even some things that are more just egregious, child pornography, for example, by not having that on the platform, we'll give the platform to more people so they can share their voice. And so it's a constant tension that we wrestle with. We wrestle with daily. My teams wrestle with it all the time. We try to strike that balance. It's a hard one. We know that there are many opinions. We want to be across all the spectrum of ideas to have those ideas fostered on the platform. But again, it is a difficult discussion.
YouTube is a place where we want anyone to come and share their ideas, diverse opinions about their politics, things that are even controversial or offensive. Our community guidelines are politically neutral, and YouTube is a place where users are uploading content. So the community guidelines are in place to ensure that we are creating a free and open platform for users to upload their own content, but they're also in place to ensure that that's happening free from hate, from violence and harassment on the platform.
Earlier this year, when a member of my own conference of my own party made inexcusable remarks, Republican leadership acted very quickly and disciplined him. In fact, that member sits on 0 committees right now. It's a shame that the same can't be said for my colleagues across the aisle. They continue to stand by and accept anti-Semitic remarks from a member of their own party. They couldn't even unite around a simple resolution to condemn anti-Semitism without watering it down. Last year, 11 Jewish worshipers were killed and 6 others were wounded at the Tree of Life Synagogue, which is just outside my district in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The day after that cowardly act, I stood in solidarity with Americans of all religions, of all races, of all ethnicities at a vigil to honor the victims.
Well, one of the initial things I agree with you, Congressman, is there should be consequences to members of Congress who make repeated anti-Semitic remarks that are false, in addition to being insensitive. When there's no consequences, it only emboldens others to continue that. Also, when it comes to campuses where there's been constant verbal violence against Jews, there's been no consequences. The universities refuse to publicly name those people who have made these awful rallies and statements, and they've never dismissed them from school, expelled them. But by the way, when these types of episodes occur against blacks or gays or Muslims, they are expelled frequently. That's common, as they should be. I'm not opposed to that. And we should understand, we should really study why is it that one half of the world's Muslims have anti-Semitic views. This is ADL's own survey. It's not my survey. Why are 1/3 of American Muslims have anti-Semitic views? Is it a coincidence that 2 of the 3 freshmen who have made anti-Semitic remarks happen to be of that faith? We should have a study about that. And President Sisi, a Muslim leader of Egypt, has said that we need a religious revolution, and imams must step up to the plate and start making it clear that Islam has got to stop interpreting the Quran in the way it does, which promotes hatred to all sorts of people, especially Jews.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. You were speaking briefly about college campuses. I speak a lot at college campuses, and there's a lot of talk about boycott, divestment, and sanction, or the BDS movement. In your opinion, is this fueling the anti-Semitism on college campuses, and if so, to what extent?
Yes, BDS is an anti-Semitic movement whose goal, its leaders say openly, is to destroy Israel, to boycott, divest, and sanction. Fortunately, University Presidents has not allowed anything to happen with that specifically, but resolutions are passed regularly on this. There's rallies about this, really demonizing Jewish people and demonizing the Jewish state of Israel. We really need strong federal laws that make it clear that American governmental bodies will not do business with any organization or company that supports BDS. They can say whatever they want. It's not a freedom of speech issue. They can condemn Israel and Jews, but the U.S. government will not do business with them. That's really what has to happen, because the ultimate goal of BDS is Israel's destruction. And these people, by the way, never condemn the Palestinian Authority, never condemn other outrageous entities that promote hatred. The Palestinian Authority pays Arabs to murder Jews. They name schools, streets, and sports teams after Jew killers. They incite hatred against Jews in their schools, in their media, in their sermons and speeches, and you never see these BDS people condemning this really vicious human rights abusing entity, making it clear this is all about Jews, it's all about anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would love to see my Democratic colleagues condemn anti-Semitism. I have a resolution that I have filed. One of their own members of their own caucus have said very racist anti-Semitic remarks and have failed to directly address that. So to your point, I would love to see the other side of the aisle condemn one of their own for their own anti-Semitic remarks.
I'm really confused when the good doctor says that Islam does not teach hatred of Jews. There's no problems with that issue, when in fact there's a dozen or more imams in states around the country who have publicly made sermons calling to murder Jews. This is a hadith that's related to the Quran, that's considered very holy. The leaders of the Muslim world from Al-Azhar University have made vile statements against Jewish people. We really need to have Muslims step up and do what President Sisi says, and there has to be a reformation and a rethinking of the aspects of the Quran that promote hatred against Jews. That's why you have constant murder of Jews in Israel, despite the fact that Israel has offered a state to the Palestinian Authority 4 times in the last 20 years. So this is, to me, one of the most serious issues as to why are half the world's Muslims anti-Semitic, why are 75 to 95% of the Muslims in the Middle East anti-Semitic, why are 1/3 of Muslims in America anti-Semitic, which is 2 to 5 times the rate of anti-Semitism of any other group. This has to be explored, but people are afraid to, because then they're called an Islamophobe. And this has nothing to do with Islamophobia. This has to do with the truth, with data that ADL themselves has put forth, surveys have put forth. Pew has also put forth similar data. Why is this an issue? We have to talk about this Muslim anti-Semitism because this is endangering Jews really in America and throughout the world. God forbid this will be translated into physical violence even greater than we're seeing today.
The first person and possibly the only American ever ordered killed by a U.S. president with a drone strike was Anwar al-Awlaki. The only reason he was a U.S. citizen is his parents came over on a visa and he was born, and they took him back to Yemen, taught him to hate America. But he was working with the Bush administration and the Obama administration. An imam, he was encouraging terrorism that they didn't realize at the time, but apparently that justified killing an American citizen without a trial just through the drone strike. And I really appreciate the atmosphere here. Ms. Patterson, you sound like somebody I would love to be listening to every day, all day. And I would just encourage you, in the name of eliminating hate, it helps if you don't misquote or mischaracterize statements of the president. He never said asylum seekers are animals. He was talking about MS-13. And if you see the pictures of what they have done, I don't condone calling humans animals, but I've sent people to prison. I've even sentenced people to death, and agreed with James Byrd's killers being sentenced to death. Thank you. My time's expired.
I thank the gentleman. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Eileen Hershenov is the Senior Vice President of Policy for the Anti-Defamation League. Prior to joining the ADL, she served as General Counsel and Head of Public Policy for the Wikimedia Foundation. She earned her BA from Yale College and her JD from Yale Law School. Dr. Mohammed Abu Salha is a medical professional from North Carolina. Before moving to the United States, he worked as a general practitioner in Iraq, Kuwait, and Jordan. Dr. Abu Salha attended Eastern Virginia Medical School for a degree in psychiatry and his residency. Eva Patterson is the president and co-founder of the Equal Justice Society. Her long career of anti-discrimination work includes 26 years with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, 13 of them as executive director, co-founding and chairing the California Civil Rights Coalition for 18 years, and serving as the vice president of the ACLU National Board for 8 years. She received her JD from UC Berkeley's School of Law. Neil Potts currently serves as the public policy director for Facebook, who oversees the development and implementation of Facebook's community standards. Mr. Potts graduated from the United States Naval Academy and the University of Virginia Law School. Prior to joining Facebook, he worked as a ground intelligence officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. Alexandria Walden is a public policy and government relations counsel for Google. She also represents Google at the Global Network Initiative. Prior to joining Google, Ms. Walden has worked at the Rabin Group, the Center for American Progress, and the Now Legal Defense and Education Fund. Mort Klein is national president of the Zionist Organization of America. He has served as a lecturer at Temple University and as a biostatistician at UCLA School of Public Health and the Linus Pauling Institute of Science and Medicine. Candace Owens is an American commentator and political activist. She currently serves as the Director of Communications for the advocacy group Turning Point USA. Kristin Clark currently serves as the President and Executive Director of the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Previously, she has worked with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund and at the U.S. Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. She earned her AB from Harvard and her JD from Columbia Law School, which is in my district. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you will have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals the 5 minutes have expired.
Thomas Jefferson said the following about me and my ancestors. They have no tenderness and love. They are intellectually inferior. They are physically unattractive. Thus began a narrative, says law professor Shauna Marshall, that Black people were only good for physical labor, we were inhuman and violent. This was a narrative necessary in order to justify slavery. White supremacy has been a feature of the mistreatment of Native Americans for years, and it was applied to Africans once we arrived here. From the beginning of our country's inception through the Constitution, the Founding Fathers knowingly and consciously embraced slavery and white supremacy. Politics, including the 3 branches of government, have played and continue to play a role in the perpetuation of white supremacy and the continued mistreatment of Black people, either through action or inaction.
How are we fighting back? We successfully disrupted online platforms that promote hate and racial violence, shutting down and obstructing some of the largest hate sites online. We advocated for Facebook to abandon its ill-conceived policy under which they banned white supremacist activity but permitted white nationalist and white separatist activity, because we know these racist ideologies are indistinguishable and equally dangerous. We're working with and pushing the tech sector to reform their policies to ensure that they're not providing a breeding ground for violent white supremacists, and we've partnered with the International Association of Chiefs of Police to strengthen law enforcement's response to hate as well. We also see an FBI diverting resources to investigate so-called Black identity extremism, all at the expense of combating real hate.